We got Most Disturbing Lost Video Games by Paranoials? Something like that. Alright, let's get into it.
Rape Day was an indie visual novel that was developed by a user
Starting off strong. Okay.
named Desplant, whose real name was Jake. The game was planned for an April 2019 release on Steam. The game puts you in control of a sociopathic serial killer during a zombie apocalypse, but judging by the game's horrific name, this wouldn't be its main plot. It would be centered around harassing, and killing different women through the user's dialogue choices. It had over 7,000 words and 500 finished rendered images, and a full content warning on its Steam page. The creator Desplant openly marketed the game toward what he called a niche audience. According to his words, the game was meant for the 4% of the population that were sociopaths, as he would frame it as a dark comedy inspired by horror novels and psychological thrillers. Steam had been operating under a pretty loose content policy at the time, as they even publicly stated in 2018 that they'd basically allow almost anything that wasn't illegal or quote straight up trolling. The game sat visible on the platform for 3 weeks, and at some point
The terrorist group ISIS has weaponized the virus and poisoned the water supply in all major cities.
even becoming one of the most searched Steam
Holy shit, wait. Oh, she's got some big old titties.
visible on the platform for 3 weeks, and at some point even becoming one of the most searched Steam games on Google. As well as during development, the game would also allegedly include a scene involving a baby being killed, but would have specifically because he was worried about being labeled as a child exploiter. And almost overnight, Rape
My god. At least he did that.
would become the most hated game on the platform. Many petitions went up on change.org almost immediately, one alone pulling over 100,000 signatures, landing it as the 4th most.
See, I've got a monkey brain, alright? I see boobs and, the symbols clap together.
Signed gaming petition on the entire site, as it wasn't just regular people either. British MP Hannah Bardell and Scottish Parliament member Shona Robinson both went on record calling for the UK government to review how something like this even made it onto Steam, with all parties feeling as equally as disgusted and disturbed. And it only became a matter of time before Valve would respond. They would finally pull the game in March of 2019, but the way they did it also left a lot of people unsatisfied. Their official statement never condoned the content, as they said the game posed unknown costs and risks to their business, and left it at that. The game was pulled only a month before its official release, so we could only assume the game was pretty much finished. No build or demo of the game has ever been released to the public, making it completely lost. But that would be until Desplant made his own statement, which left people even more confused and concerned than before. He would go on to call Steam a reactionary company, insisting their decision has nothing to do with any actual policy, and said he was already making plans to sell the game directly from his own website.
Really?
He even talked about reaching out to other developers whose games had also been banned from Steam to build some kind of separate platform for games that were too
Bro, what?
had also been banned from Steam to build some kind
They spelled careful wrong. How dare they?
of separate
weird.
platform for games that were
Shameful.
too extreme to be sold anywhere mainstream. He would later backtrack from these statements, but would keep his word and would release the game. The game would be sold for a couple of days before being taken down for unknown reasons, but for the people who were dedicated enough at the time, did in fact get it. And if you weren't one of the few people who bought it, the game was deemed as pretty inaccessible to the public and was widely considered as partial.
He looked... No, he does not look like me. I got facial hair.
Yeah, but copies of the
I got
game
facial
would
hair.
eventually resurface. The game's entire purpose was not only to offend, but was to see how far a developer could take his work before being taken down. In the few reviews that I was able to find, basically all said that the game was terrible, as Rape probably should have stayed lost. All said that
For me, a visual novel lives and dies by its characters, and I say that Rape Day has one of the worst characters ever. In a game like this, the game describes your characters as a serial killer, rapist. Look, I enjoy going on a rampage from Grand Theft Auto as much as the next guy, but this was a step too far for me. Add to this, the game is set in a weird zombie apocalypse kind of world. You have a very strange setting for a game.
The game was terrible, as Ray probably should have stayed lost. On April 26 of 2002, 19-year-old Robert Steinhauser walked into the Gutenberg Gymnasium wearing a ninja mask and carrying a 9mm pistol with somewhere between 500 and 1,000 rounds of ammunition. He had been expelled from school just 2 months earlier for forging doctor's signatures on his absent notes and had been lying to his parents about still attending ever since. That morning, he told them he was going in to take his end-of-the-year exams, but instead, he would move through the building room by room, teachers and staff with the idea of keeping students untouched. 13 staff members, the vice principal, along with 2 students who were struck when Robert fired through a locked door, also including a police officer who tried to enter the building, would be all shot and killed by Robert. Eventually, a history teacher managed to convince Robert into an empty room as he would shove him in and lock the door, where he would off himself shortly after. It would be known as the Erfurt School Massacre and was deemed as one of the darkest days in modern German history. In the weeks that followed, investigators started piecing together who Robert was outside of school, wanting to know what exactly were his motives. But what they would also find was that he would spend a lot of his time gaming, specifically first-person shooters. His games of choice would be Counter-Strike, Half-Life, and most importantly, Doom. The media in the 90s and early 2000s, and honestly even sometimes now, would blame violent video games for violent crimes, with many politicians arguing that interactive violence was more dangerous than
Germany copy America's school culture.
anything on TV or film because the player was actively participating in it. And after the Columbine shooting in 1999, Doom would specifically get singled out because the shooters Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold had been such huge fans of the game, as some media outlets would run with the story that the game had essentially been used as a training simulator to commit violent crimes. The two would create custom levels for Doom, which were known as WADs, which stands for Where's All My Data, where players create and share their own maps, textures, and environments, and the modding community around it was massive. Robert, who was also a massive fan of Doom, had been rumored to have his own custom WADs for years. In a post on the Columbine High School Massacre discussion forum, where users were discussing Robert's history with first-person shooters, as some users would bring up that he had his own custom Doom levels, but nobody could deny or confirm if it was true or not. There were a few mentions of it online in different videos and Reddits, but nothing was ever concrete. That was until users would find a YouTuber named Cannibal Wolf who had actually recorded footage of the WAD at some point, but their channel has since long been deleted. A Reddit user mentioned that his friend had preserved his videos on a private Google Drive, and in June of 2023, all 94 of them were uploaded to the Internet Archive, and sitting in the collection would be a video titled Doom 2: Robert Steinhauser's Map.
Oh.
The footage would be a little bit over 2 minutes long, and the level would be extremely bare bones and glitchy. This is the only known gameplay available online. The actual file has never been found, no archives nor copies have ever been found anywhere, and it's not quite certain how Cannibal Wolf had even obtained this in the first place. And unlike Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, where most of their WADs have been downloadable for decades, Robert's level is much more obscure, making it very unlikely that it will ever resurface. On April 20th of 2009, a 99-cent game called Baby Shaker went live on the iOS App Store. The game would show a drawing of a crying baby, requiring the user to shake their iPhone to, quote, quiet it down. And
Oh my god. They put that on the Apple Store?
if you shake fast
Jeez.
enough, 2 X marks would appear over the baby's eyes. Apple was known for having one of the strictest app review processes in the industry, as developers had been rejected for far less, including apps that were completely harmless. So imagine the surprise of users seeing an app that would pretty much simulate shaking a baby to death The info and description of the game was, on a plane, on a bus, in a theater, babies are everywhere you don't want them to be. They're always distracting you from preparing for that big presentation at work with their incessant crying. Before Baby Shaker, there was nothing you could do about it. See how long you can endure his or her adorable cries before you just have to find a way to quiet them down. Never ever shake a baby. The game was developed.
Yeah. Okay. That's basically saying, like, we hate children. We hate babies. We want to shake them to death. In Minecraft. How's that get on the Apple Store? Or the App Store, iPhone App Store, whatever.
By a small studio called Soft, and somehow made it through Apple's review process without being flagged.
That makes
The
zero
game
sense.
would highlight shaken baby syndrome, which is the leading cause of fatal brain injuries in infants. The game would gain massive popularity almost instantly, as it only lasted 2 days before a site called Crabs wrote about it in an article the night it launched. And by the next morning, a founder of a shaken baby syndrome nonprofit named Jennifer Dickens had seen the article and sent it as a press release to over 30,000 media companies. Child advocate groups would also point that the app had gone live during Shaken Baby Syndrome Awareness Week and National Child Abuse Prevention Month. Whether this was intentional from the developer is unknown.
Probably.
As despite the actual gameplay being pretty tame, the
Oh, children, they're very cute. Oh, that's good.
game in of itself and its content was extremely disturbing. Apple pulled the app within a day before briefly reappearing and then got taken down for good. Their spokesperson called it deeply offensive, as it should have never been approved, and even the developers admitted it was a bad idea. Gameplay fully exists online and is well documented. However, no build of the game has ever been released since then, and unless someone still has it on their old iPhone, the game is likely gone.
Well, the wrestling world in shock today. Former champion Chris Benoit found dead in his Atlanta home along with his wife and young son. Police now treating the discovery as a double.
Oh, man.
By 2007, SmackDown vs. Raw had built itself into the most premier wrestling game franchise on the market, and the 2008 installment was not only shaping up to be the biggest one yet, it actually became the highest selling wrestling game of all time, with over 7.3 to 7.9 million copies sold across multiple.
Hey, is that Dave Bautista?
Developers Ukes would introduce new features that would completely change how wrestling games even operate.
Brother played that game?
For the
Really?
first time, wrestlers were given actual mechanical differences that affected how you played the game, giving each wrestler a distinct identity in the ring. The wrestler Chris Benoit was one of the cornerstones of the game and was rumored to even be featured on the game's cover art. The two-time world heavyweight champion and one of the most technically gifted wrestlers of his generation, his inclusion in the game was going to be huge. But only 5 months before the game was supposed to be released, the developers would receive news that would make all of their hard work a complete liability. Benoit had missed a pay-per-view appearance in Houston with no warning and no explanation, which alone was enough to make many of his peers extremely worried. And what made the situation even more strange would be the bizarre text he would send to his friend and former wrestler Chavo Guerrero. He would send weird and unsettling messages about the back door being unlocked, and one that was nothing but his own home address. Without any context, all of these texts were completely nonsensical. Enough time had passed, and the authorities would show up to his house in Georgia, and what they would discover would change wrestling and the WWE forever. They would find his wife Nancy and his 7-year-old son Daniel both dead, while also discovering Benoit's lifeless body in the weight room. Chris Benoit had killed his wife Nancy first, strangling her with a cord. His 7-year-old son Daniel was found dead in his own bedroom, with reports later showing that he had been sedated beforehand. Benoit had spent the rest of the weekend in his house before hanging himself in the weight room on Monday.
Oh my god. I don't understand how a father could ever do that to their own child. I don't understand.
After his death, researchers would examine Benoit's
I watched a video about him. It was very awful. Imagine.
brain, and they would discover that Benoit has suffered from severe CTE, which was caused by years of repetitive head trauma, describing his brain as resembling an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. But the
Yeah, okay, that makes a lot more sense now. Yeah, CTE, holy shit. If you haven't seen the movie Concussion, highly recommend watching it. that gives you a whole new perspective on the NFL and just CTE in general. CTE basically just completely alters how you reason, what seems rational, your emotional, everything. You're not even the same person. And the worst part about it is that the only way to know you have CTE is through autopsy, or if somebody has CTE is through autopsy. So they literally have to be dead before you find out they have CTE. So in the NFL, because that was a huge problem that the NFL had with CTE, they're taking a lot more precautions. Like they added no lowering the helmet. They throw a flag on that. They watch for players for signs of concussions. They make sure that if a player suffered a concussion, they have to. Even then, though, I'm not sure if it's really if it's enough. I mean, it's better than it was, but like there was a NFL player that, well, there's Aaron Hernandez, first of all, probably the most famous one, but he killed. Oh, who did he kill? Accused of shooting and killing 27-year-old Odin Lloyd. 2012 Boston homicide, double homicide. Mike Webster, patient 0. The decline after retiring, Webster underwent a catastrophic mental and physical collapse. He suffered from severe amnesia, depression, dementia. He became completely unhoused, frequently sleeping in his car or inside a Pittsburgh train station. To cope with agonizing chronic pain and relentless insomnia, Webster would routinely use TENS unit, a localized nerve shocking device, on himself until he passed out, or used super to fix cracks in his rotting teeth. When he died of a heart attack in 2002 at age 50, a forensic pathologist named Dr. Bennett Amalu examined his brain, expected to see a normal brain. Amalu instead discovered the heavily damaged tau protein choked tissue that led to the first ever formal diagnosis of CTE in an NFL player. Died by suicide from gunshot wound in the chest. Dead by suicide. He also shot himself in the chest. And there's a lot of suicides in Aaron Hernandez. There was a guy that killed himself by running into a gas tanker. And there was a Chiefs player that killed himself in front of the coaches that he used to play for. Jovan Belcher. So the tragedy on December 1st, 2012, Belcher, a 25-year-old starting linebacker for the Kansas City Chiefs, fatally shot his 22-year-old girlfriend, Cassandra Perkins, at their home. Following a domestic argument, the shooting was witnessed by Belcher's mother, who was visiting to help care for the couple's 3-month-old daughter. Immediately after, Belcher fled the house and drove his car straight to the Chiefs practice facility near the Arrowhead Stadium. When he arrived, he was armed and encountered the Chiefs general manager, Scott Pioli, his head coach, Romeo Crennel, in the parking lot. The attempt to intervene, Pioli and Crennel desperately tried to talk Belcher down, convince him to drop the weapon. Belcher reportedly thanked both men for everything they had done for his career and stated that he couldn't stay as police sirens began approaching the facility. Belcher walked a short distance away, knelt down, and shot himself in the head. In 2014, a neuropathologist released the autopsy findings confirming that Belcher had significant CTE damage. It is just so sad to see. Makes you really question, is football even worth it? You know? Is it really worth it? I mean, they definitely make it seem worth it. And it is a fun game to watch and a fun game to play, but when you see cases like that,
The actual motive to his killings is still unclear. In the hours after the news broke, The company would air a 3-hour tribute episode dedicated to Benoit, but when the incredibly disturbing truth came out, that tribute episode would be buried. They would launch one of the most aggressive erase campaigns in the company's history, pulling him from TV, stripping his matches from DVDs, and wiping him from their website entirely, with, of course, SmackDown vs. Raw being next. His model, his voice work, and his movements all had to be removed while keeping the November release date intact, and despite its various delays, the game would come out on time. However, the removal of Benoit wasn't as clean as they may have thought. Players who would data mine into the game post-launch started finding his fingerprints all over the files. His crippler crossfade, which was his submission finisher, was still sitting there fully intact with its own animation, as players who would hack into the game could still fully use it. Pre-release builds with him fully intact are confirmed to exist somewhere. The game files or any of the builds are likely still deep in their archives, or maybe were even buried by them, as it's been almost 20 years since the game came out and nothing has ever been leaked, neither any build or alleged cover art of him included, making them completely lost. A Japanese doujin club called Girlfriend had been putting a series of hentai-based browser games that would be centered around popular anime female characters. The series would run from 1999 to 2005. It would use characters from series such as Crayon Shin-chan, Detective Conan, One Piece, and Ghost in a Shell. The player would have the option to rank the female characters that appear in the shows, as certain games would also have a necrophilia and function, and much like the first entry, these games will be targeted towards a very specific and disturbing audience. And to understand why something like this even existed, a doujin club is a group of independent creators who self-publish their own work, manga, and art completely outside of any official publishing.
There's such thing as too much free will.
Structure. The culture had been around since the 70s and 80s, largely built around Comic Market, a massive convention in Tokyo where creators sold their work directly to buyers with no publisher involved. Copyright enforcement in that space was pretty much non-existent, and with platforms like DL Site emerging in the late 90s, creators could sell their work globally with zero content oversight, as this would open the door to some extremely dark material and explicit adult content based on anime characters. This scene had already been building long before Girlfriend even existed. The games were sold through doujin storefronts like DL Site, which at the time had very little moderation. The person behind it went by the name Asagao, but beyond their username, almost nothing is known about who they are. The games ran for about 6 years. The owner would post an update saying the club's website was going down temporarily for a redesign, but this would be the last that we would ever hear from them. And the site, including the games, have never came back. The games got pulled from every storefront they were listed on and have never returned since. The entire list of every game they've published are available on the Lost Media Wiki. A handful of the games have been recovered, but most of them are completely lost. A description for their most popular game called Afternoon at Misae reads,
Like doujinshi and play a few games, I never hear of Girlfriend before. Probably for the best.
as a simulation game based on the anime series Crayon Shin-chan. The game involves the player taking the role of a resident of the falling apartments and Misae Nohara, who lives next door. Despite the series being lost for years at this point, there were some people who were still curious enough to try to hunt for them. The series would find its way to obscure Korean internet communities, as they would for some reason refer to it as a legendary night game. One of the members in this community would actually find the game in February of 2024. They would upload it to 2 separate sites and then would be deleted by the same person within hours, for reasons nobody has explained, as it hasn't been seen since and is very likely to never be seen again.
Okay. Wow. That good video. Good video. Subscribe. But wow, that's something else. What? I have a new mission? You're gonna try and find that game? Not weird. Good luck with that.